Hello and welcome back to another of our video tutorials. Today we will talk about what is good gameplay design. Think about all our favorite games. What are the things they have in common? What makes them so addicting? And how do game developers come up with those ideas that make them so fun to play? One of the most commonly quoted answers to these questions would be that of Sid Meier. He once said that a game is a series of interesting choices. The 2015 role-playing game The Witcher 3 seems to be a literal manifestation of this belief. In its widely praised storyline, the main character Geralt of Rivia is forced to make moral choices that may decide the fate of other characters or even alter the game world in general. But it's tough moral choices for Sid Meier, the developer of the Civilization franchise, a widely successful game franchise with barely any story or human characters, referring to, is it possible to have a series of interesting choices in games that are not driven by story or characters? According to the influential game researcher Jesper Juhl, there are two types of digital games or gameplay. They are the games of progression and the games of emergence. Games of progression. Players mainly proceed through a linear set of events and challenges by taking predefined actions and occasionally make important decisions that change how the plot would go on. The Walking Dead game franchise is a perfect example of this type of gameplay. What the player needs to do is to talk and interact with different characters to push the plot forward. And when the time comes, he or she is asked to make difficult decisions. This kind of game functions as a predefined system, and the player needs to learn how different elements inside this system interact with one another. As player proceeds through the game, all the possibilities begin to emerge. In other words, choices are presented as these possibilities. Don't know what I'm talking about yet? Take a look at this clip from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
We're going to start a fire using another fire. So what we're going to use is our handy dandy torch. We're going to swipe it on this existing fire. Then we're going to swipe it on our pile of wood, and boom, more fire. Now you can also use things like tree branches or wooden weapons, do the same thing, but they're going to last a lot shorter. The last thing about using existing fire is you can actually knock an arrow, turn it into a fire arrow, and start a fire that way.
However, choices are not created equal. Some are interesting while others aren't. So the first thing you need to consider is how to present the choices to your player, or more precisely, how to teach your players the meaning of their actions so that they can make a sensible choice. The level 1/1 of the original Super Mario Bros. Is a classical example of teaching your player gameplay without having them to read anything. Take a look at this clip and see for yourself.
The way Mario starts also informs the player where they'll be going for the entirety of the game. Going right. Just looking at the screen shows you the wide open path. Despite the fact that Mario spends most of his time in the center of the screen, the designers made a deliberate choice to start Mario elsewhere. This affordance through the use of space does a mountain of work that games today spend lengthy cutscenes on. The player never feels lost in purpose, and they know how to begin without even needing to be told what the goal is. Just move right. So, along Mario's wayward journey to the right, the first thing we see is a question mark, bright and flashing so we can't miss it. It invites exploration without being threatening. You can approach it at your own pace. So you do, but just as you get close, something else appears. Our first enemy slides on screen. How does the player know it's an enemy? Well, two reasons. One, the sprite itself has some distinctly angry eyebrows. Two, the Goomba, unlike the object you've already encountered, is moving right towards you. Imagine if the Goomba was stationary. Not nearly as threatening.
After you have presented the choices to the player, it's time for you to make sure that the choices they make have actual consequences and meanings. In a plot-driven game, this can be done by, well, killing off some characters if the character made a really bad choice. It's a cheesy way to make a choice meaningful, but narrative is a topic that worths its own video, so let's just leave it at that here. An interesting ability system is a must for role-playing game. Different branches of ability, like those of warrior, mage, and thief, would need to feel and function differently from one another. One branch may function better than other branches in certain situations, but all branches should remain viable options for the entirety of the game. Don't forget to leave some space for experimentation and awkward combination. The same goes for strategy games. Allow players to win in different ways. Of course, it's also a good idea to reward players who make good use of resources and sometimes even punish them if they make bad choices. Even action games should allow the players to complete the challenges, even if they choose different strategies. All in all, you should always give your players a variety of choices that are actually different from one another, while making sure that all the choices are at least viable in different situations. Last thing to bear in mind when it comes to interesting choices is that you should not force the players to do things that aren't necessary. Take Red Dead Redemption 2 from Rockstar as an example. This critically acclaimed game is often faced with a seemingly trivial line of criticism: too much horse riding. With barely any means to fast travel, very often the player can only migrate in the vast open world by riding the horseback, and some of the players find it to be too much and even boring. Compare it with games like The Witcher 3, in which you can walk from one location to another, or you can choose to simply fast travel. Some may argue that horse riding is more immersive than fast travel, but again, immersion is a topic for another day. It is, after all, your game and your choice.